What I found is that if people, when making a borrowing decision, follow just really 3 simple rules, they're going to make a better decision in terms of deciding when to borrow and what to borrow, how to borrow, and so forth. And the rules are pretty simple. Number 1 is that the economic return on the amount of money borrowed must be greater than the economic cost. So for example, if I borrow on my home mortgage, in most cases, if I borrow at 5 or 6% or whatever the interest rate might be, I'm going to get a growth in value, typically, in my home value. So I've got an economic return that's greater than my economic cost. In some cases, maybe investment debt works that way also. But if you look at, say, credit card debt, where you're paying 18 to 21% interest for eating out, for taking a vacation, for buying clothes, for buying gas, for all those things that you use credit cards for, what you find is that the economic return is 0 or negative. So why would you spend 18 to 21% to get a negative return? You wouldn't do that. So how do you handle credit cards? Well, credit cards are okay. Credit cards never got anybody into problems. It's just the people that hold the credit cards that get into problems. So when you use a credit card, plan on paying it off 100% at the end of the month. In other words, use the credit card for convenience. And therefore, you won't violate the rule of the economic return being less than the economic cost. How about car loans? Anytime you borrow money for a car that depreciates in value, you get no economic return on it whatsoever. So why would you make an investment where you have a guaranteed economic loss? When you're borrowing money at one interest rate to pay for something that's going down in value, it just doesn't make sense. Once again, you can compare that, if you will, to a mortgage where you get an increase typically in value and you pay a fixed rate of interest over a long time frame, so economically it can make sense. The second rule is that if you're going to borrow money, you've got to have a guaranteed way to repay it. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when you take a house mortgage again, if I borrow money on my house or my home, the banker is saying, if you can't repay it, we'll take the home back. And therefore, you have, if you will, a guaranteed way to repay. When you borrow money on credit cards or car loans or maybe even investment debt, you may not have a guaranteed way to repay. Now, why do you need a guaranteed way to repay? Well, biblically, you don't want to presume upon the future. Therefore, you need a guaranteed way to repay, so as to not presume upon the future. The third rule, and this is the hard one, is that the spouses must be in total agreement as to the borrowing decision. I like what my mentor, Dr. Howard Hendricks, says: God did not give you a spouse to frustrate you, but to complete you. And I have found in my counsel with thousands of people that husbands and wives think differently about debt, and many a husband has been saved by listening to his wife's counsel. I was speaking one time to a group of professional football players, ex-professional football players, and I used that illustration. Husbands and wives must be in perfect agreement. And there's a wife of a Super Bowl champion. This guy had 3 Super Bowl rings, and his wife was sitting in the back row sobbing. And later she said to me that my husband borrowed money to start a business. He didn't listen to me. I didn't think it was a good idea. We lost everything. And he was a Super Bowl champion. He had a lot of money, and he invested it for what he thought was a really good thing economically, but he violated the third rule. So I would say, if you're going to borrow money, make sure the economic return is greater than the economic cost, make sure that the spouses are in agreement, and make sure that you have a guaranteed way to repay.